And then, all right, we're here. All right, thanks for your patience. All right, so we've got Advocacy 101. So my name is Kathy Nathan, which you've heard about 5 times already in this session, and I'm the Advocacy Commissioner of Minnesota PTA, and I'm also from Rochester, Minnesota. So since this is our first virtual workshop, so you know, these are all going to be recorded. And Christine, are you recording? Okay.
Yes, I am.
And you'll be muted. You know how to update your Brady Bunch box. We're gonna try to save the chat. I'm gonna leave that up to Christine to note any questions in the chat. Raise your hand to click on the reactions icon and message us if you have any troubleshooting. And we're going to take questions in between each section. So feel free to type them in the chat at any time, and then Christine will let me know. So what we're going to try to cover tonight is strategies and resources for using the power of PTA voices to advocate at your school and to your school district on behalf of children. We're going to talk a little bit about the status of the legislative and policy priorities, where they are right now in the Minnesota legislature, and how you can help support pushing them past the finish line. An opportunity to become our Minnesota PTA Federal Legislative Chair, and then talking about sharing individual stories to help impact decision makers who pass laws and write policies that affect your child's education. So rights and advocacy. Just to ground us, there are federal and state laws and district and school policies to ensure that your child has a right to a public education and to be free from discrimination, and parents' rights to advocate for their children, to have information about their children's education, and to participate in their child's education. But even though those rights exist in laws and policies, there are times when you will need to advocate to ensure that those rights are being implemented, or that positive student outcomes are occurring from the existence of these laws and policies. So you may know, being part of PTA, that our tagline is "Every Child in One Voice," and that's really the definition of advocacy in the national and the state and your local PTA. One of the things that we like to emphasize is PTA's primary function is advocacy, and National PTA and Minnesota PTA wants to provide as many supports for you to make positive change that can benefit your child and every child by advocating to and working closely with school leaders and district administrators, your superintendent and school board, and state and federal legislators. So one of the things that I also want to kind of, in all transparency, is that I'm a permanent parent advocate, but right now I also sit on my district school board. So I've been at different seats in the advocacy table. And one of the things that I've heard, both when I was getting parent advocacy training from National PTA and when I'm getting school board training as a school board member, is the importance of the chain of communication and who to contact about an issue. And you know, most school districts will say the place to start if you have a problem is always the source of the issue or the problem. And one thing to consider is that the problem or the issue might be a big deal for you or a big deal for your child, but the people who are involved in the system may have no knowledge of it. And it's you're doing a service by bringing up the issue or the problem, because they may not be aware that it exists, and you might be providing valuable information to make important changes in the system. But we always say to start at the right place. So if you have a classroom concern, start with the teacher. If you have a school or program concern, contact the principal or the program manager. If you have a concern that's broader, that affects the district, contact the district administrator responsible for the department area or the superintendent. Or if you don't know who to call, start with the office of the superintendent. And it's really only the time to contact the school board If you have gone through all of those levels and are still not receiving redress or an acceptable answer, or if you have concerns or interest in the work of the board, like policy development or implementation, monitoring or oversight, the performance of the superintendent, or a school board meeting agenda item. We hear a lot from parents who start with their first email as being the school board, but they haven't gone through the chain of communication to see if it can be resolved at the level where the activity or where the issue or the problem is actually happening, and where the people actually have more power to make the changes in a more direct manner. Some of the other pieces of advocacy is also communicating the issue or problem. Some of the barriers to resolving issues or problem is really a communication issue. So a lot of the things that we've learned in the area of advocacy are some of these steps. So first is identifying the issue or the problem and telling your story. So before you contact someone in that chain of communication, identify what do you want to change to make sure your student, or if you're advocating for something that's broader for every student, has what they need to succeed. And what needs to be fixed or changed from your perspective. One of the things I always like to tell parent advocates is that your perspective matters. So if don't feel not confident because you think, oh, it's just me. Like I said, you might find out later that it isn't just you, but you were the one who had the courage to bring up the topic to the person who could make the change. And finally, how has the issue or problem impacted you or your child? We're going to talk a little bit later about sharing your story, but it's really important to bring it to that level of how it is affecting your child's learning or your child's situation, because often that helps deliver the message more clearly. A second step is to, for yourself, understand the issue or the problem. Now, you don't have to be an expert on the issue in order to advocate about it, but it does help to find out as much about the issues as you can before you're going to the table and having a conversation. So one way to understand the issue is to find out how the issue affects other students or other parents and families, to ask around and see if anyone else might be facing the same circumstance. Find out who the district staff or leaders that make decisions about the issue. That will help you identify where in the chain of communication you might want to start advocating for the issue. And what has your school or district already said about the issue or the problem? And looking on your school or district's website or in school or district communications, like newsletters or social media or emails to parents. One of the things I like to say here is you might find out there is no information about the issue or the problem that's available to parents, and that might very well be the problem. It might be a communication problem that they're just really not saying enough about the situation, and parents need to be informed better. And finally, you can research other schools in your district or other districts. And that's where you can use your local PTSA and PTA networks, or contact the state PTA to see if any other district in the state has addressed it. And we also have national contacts that we can look to see if there's other states that might have dealt with the same issue. Finally, when you're approaching the conversation and in the conversation, to suggest a solution and agree on action steps. If you think you have a solution to the issue and the problem, bring it to the conversation. A lot of times we have an issue, right? But we're not thinking about the solution. And sometimes the best solutions do come from parents because they can see the whole situation. And those common sense, easy to understand solutions work best, especially at the beginning of the conversation. But you may get more information or understanding during your conversation with the district, with the teacher or the principal or the district leader, and you can use it to improve the possible solutions. The other thing we always recommend is to identify action steps at the end of every meeting. So what action should happen next to move toward a solution? Who's going to be responsible for the action, and when and how can you expect follow-up, so that you can take action on following up if you don't hear back within the time frame that's been established. Finally, our best advocacy training tells us to document everything. Write down dates and phone numbers, the names of people you speak with, and what response you receive. And remember to keep that information. It's not only helpful to document the process, but it's useful to inform people who might want to help or join in the advocacy down the line after you've already started the process. And one more important piece is to organize your community, to get other people involved and mobilized around your issue or problem. This is one of my favorite slides to do with advocacy, because I think we've all been in this situation and I think we all recognize it's true. There is power in the number of parents advocating for the same issue. One parent might be referred to as a parent who has issues, but two parents is a parent with issues and their friend, and three parents are troublemakers, and five parents means we need to have a meeting. 10 parents, they start to listen. 25 parents, they start calling you our dear friends, and 50 parents is a powerful organization. There is power in numbers, and I think advocacy isn't natural for everyone to do. They don't want to make waves. They're worried about retaliation. So sometimes even taking that first step makes it more comfortable to do it together. The structure of the local PTA provides that structure to help support parents in the advocacy piece. So take advantage of the fact that you already have an established organization to help mobilize parents around common issues. Finally, another thing to consider in advocacy is to create opportunities before there's a crisis. So to identify places for two-way communication opportunities to address the issues on an ongoing basis. So one of the things that we see that's very popular is a chat with the principal and get the PTA or the PTSA credit for hosting that chat with the principal. Not only is it a great membership recruiting tool, but it's a great visibility piece for your PTA to show that you're involved in an advocacy function. Can happen before your own PTA business meeting. It could be a special event. It could happen at lunch. It could happen over breakfast. It could happen at dinner. And usually the principals come with their update of things that are happening in the building. And the best principals will be willing to take questions from the floor, either ahead of time through an online form or in person at the meeting about issues that are facing. We've been doing this at our high school since 2009, and some of the best changes and conversations have come out of those chat with the principals. Another program that PTA says have been successful is the advocacy by the grade presentation or discussions. So to take time at a meeting or a PTA event to talk about a specific grade and what parents can expect coming up. So for example, third grade, what can parents expect in third grade? What kind of curriculum will be in that grade? And then have parents who have had kids in that grade talk about what the grade experiences for those students were, and maybe some of the things that were hard or challenging. And then it turns into a conversation of what might be able to be improved for the experience for a child grade by grade. And it kind of breaks down the whole school experience into more manageable chunks to talk about suggestions that might bring some broader changes for all students. We've also seen PTAs do elected officials go to school day. As a school board member, I can tell you being invited to a school is something that sometimes schools are afraid to do. Sometimes principals are afraid to do. But the PTAs are in a perfect position to invite school board members or city council members or your state or federal legislators to visit your school for the day and actually see the impact of some of the decisions that they're making and how it's implemented in the school and impacts the students and teachers. And finally, assign someone on your PTA to monitor district-wide decisions and their timing. So monitor school board agendas and district communication and communicate those opportunities to provide feedback to your members. So find out when your district budget approval is, and if part of a cycle there's a public hearing or a meeting where people can come and give feedback. Look at when your superintendent's being evaluated and see if there's opportunities for listening sessions or feedback on their performance. And finally, anytime there's district-wide surveys or focus groups or listening sessions. Sometimes those big decisions that might impact you slip through the cracks simply because you weren't aware of an agenda or a meeting item. And they're not always hard to follow unless someone is actually tracking when those events happen. All right, one more thing. Guidance on advocacy positions for local units. We've gotten questions from local units about wanting to take on advocacy issues within their district or within their community. And the first thing we do when we get those notices is to see what National PTA has to say. So National PTA has a series of position statements available on their national website, which have been developed since their first convention in 1897. You may have gotten an email, well, you did get an email recently from National PTA talking about a comment period on the new position statements that are going to be discussed at the National Convention this summer. So they do this every year. And it outlines the opinion or the will or the intent of the association on certain problems or situations that affect children and youth. The thing that's important to remember is that state or local PTAs cannot take official advocacy positions that contradict the National PTA position statements. So for example, there are position statements on school lunch. I should have a quote from it. It's slipping my mind, but the National PTA takes a position on a school lunch program. We can't take a position either at the state or local PTA that might contradict that same language. So those are really good resources for you to check if you're looking to advocate in child health, child safety, student data privacy and technology, elementary and secondary education, gun safety and violence prevention, opportunity and equity, and special education. Those are, and it also gives you a real, on the other hand, it also gives you a great foundation for areas where you might want to advocate for, because those position statements really give you a lot of great background information and great statements to use in your own advocacy. So that is my section on local school and district advocacy. Christine, do we have any questions in the chat?
We do not have any questions in the chat.
Okay, well, that's no problem because we can always take them at the end if you think of them. So now I'm going to move what I say one layer up, which is the Minnesota legislature. So you may be aware that the majority of funding for our public schools in Minnesota comes from the Minnesota legislature. Most of the policies or mandates or how schools and district operates also comes from the Minnesota legislature. The federal government has a role, but for an individual district, it might range between 12 and 20% of the funding and the policy, as opposed to the state legislature, which is more like 80. So what's happening is that the Minnesota legislature is meeting right now, and every year the PTA Board of Directors approves a Minnesota PTA legislative and policy agenda, which you can find on page 25 of your program. It looks like this at the top. And we approved it in January. So we have been working with those priorities throughout the legislative session, providing testimony to bills that contain our priorities as they've moved through committee. Now, usually by about this time of the year, the Senate and the House have developed their omnibus education bills, and those are done. The good news is that the House bill contains many of our priorities. Every one of our priorities is touched on in the House bill, which is super, but the Senate bill has very few of our priorities. It is a division by party line. As you can imagine, the House is controlled by the DFL and the Senate is controlled by Republicans. So the House bill conforms with a lot more of the DFL priorities and the governor's priorities. So where they are now is that they're soon headed to the full House and Senate for amendments and votes. And after the bills pass the House and Senate, the conference committees will form and negotiate and find what they can agree on. And then those bills would go back to the House and Senate, be passed, and then they'll go to the governor for his signature. And all this has to happen before May 17th. And if it doesn't, there'll be a special legislative session that could go on into the summer. Will it happen by May 17th? The experts are predicting probably not. But that doesn't mean we can't take action. So we have some structures to help you take action on our Minnesota PTA legislative priorities. And the first is something that we call Voter Voice. So Voter Voice is an online advocacy platform that you can register for. And the link is there. And if you register, you'll get an email to notify you anytime we have a new action alert. We also publish the action alerts on our Facebook page and on our Twitter feed. And you can link to that each action alert without signing up for Voter Voice, but it's far easier to receive Voter Voices in your email. Between now and the end of the legislative session, we anticipate we're going to have no more than 5 Voter Voice alerts. So it's not something that's going to come every day. It's not something that's going to come multiple times a day. They're targeted to really affect things. And I have Christine.
I do
Who's got
have,
something to tell me.
yes, I do have 2 questions. If you're able to take some, let me know.
Sure, go ahead.
From Letitia. I hope I said that right. She said, I have a question about a bill in the legislature that is under the radar, maybe from Minnesota PTA. The National PTA and the Florida PTA oppose similar bills. I may want to follow up with someone. How can I do that?
I would say to shoot me an email at advocacy@mnpta.org. And then we can see how it relates to our legislative agenda and how it relates to the bills that are in the omnibus bill.
Can you say it again?
Can you put it in the chat, Christine?
Yes.
Yes, I will.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I'm sorry, it's not anything that is in the omnibus education bill. It's in another sector.
Okay. All right. So yeah, shoot me an email about it. And if you know the bill number, that would be great. And then
Yes.
we can see where it stands for this year and talk about it.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. And do you have to be a PTA member to sign up for Voter Voice? No, you do not. The way the Voter Voice are written is that it says I'm a member of the PTA, but all of our messaging is editable. So if you're not a PTA member and you just want to contact someone, or if someone wants to join Voter Voice to be able to send these messages as a citizen, you can just take that out of your message. So yes, you can share that register with anybody who might be interested in advocating for education. So we do have an action alert that's out right now, and it's about opposing education savings accounts. And this is a provision that is in the Senate omnibus bill, but not in the, I just want to make sure nobody is telling us anything. Okay, it's in the Senate omnibus bill, but not in the House omnibus bill. And it is, it allows students who don't go to public schools to take the money that would have gone to their public school and put it in a savings account that they could then use to pay private school tuition. It has the capacity to take $11 million away from the funds available to fund public schools, and it could balloon up to $240 million by 2024 if the number of students who they think would be eligible for these education savings accounts were to take advantage of it. It is a transfer of public money to private schools, and it is something that has been fundamentally opposed by National PTA, all state PTAs, and Minnesota PTAs for a number of years. All age levels. It would be for K-12, and they could even keep that money in the account and use it for college. So the Voter Voice link for that action alert is here in your presentation. It's also available on our Minnesota PTA Facebook page and our Twitter. So my note is that I have about 10 minutes, so we're gonna get you some of the important information. Thank you. We are recruiting another person for our federal legislative chair for our advocacy team. So right now the advocacy team is me and all of you who take your voter voice actions. But we have a split in our advocacy between federal and state. And there's a specific role for a federal legislative chair to take care of all of the advocacy on the federal level. There is a lot of support from national PTA to complete the duties of the federal legislative chair that are listed here. But I want to talk about two important bonuses. One is a webinar where you meet with all the federal legislative chairs from across the country and our national government affairs staff, 1 hour every 2 months, where you're updated on all the bills and all the policy priorities and the take action plans. And you get an all expenses paid trip to our legislative conference and Hill Visit Day in Washington, DC in March of next year. I've been to 4 legislative conferences and 4 Hill Visit Days. And I can tell you, if you are interested in advocacy, this is probably the most exciting part. You get a lot of support from national with all the work, so it's not a lot of the chasing around we have to do here at the state level. And you get to go to the Capitol and meet with staff, and in many cases with our senators or representatives. Sitting across a coffee table from Amy Klobuchar in her office and talking about gun control issues is one of the highlights of my life. And I can tell you, meeting with their staff and seeing how committed they are to our education issues. And we are so lucky with the people we have in Minnesota who are committed to the same priorities we have in national PTA. It is really a fulfilling opportunity. So if you want to talk about it, you want to learn more about it, there's somebody else you want to do it with, just shoot me an email. It's on the previous page and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. And then you can look as happy as we do in this photo, which I don't know where my photo went. Hold on, I'm going to find it because I put it in here. There it is. So this was us during the virtual Hill Visit Day this year, of course, because we had COVID. But this was us meeting with Brian Davis from Senator Klobuchar's office this year. And being told that all of our priorities are exactly what Senator Klobuchar supports, and she's carrying a few bills for us. So another component of advocacy that we heard about from our legislators this year is hearing your stories. So our state and federal legislators specifically told us this year that they want to hear more stories from Minnesota parents and families, especially about your experiences this past year. Policy making is really, right now, the policy making that's happening is being made in the unknown. We don't know all the impacts of COVID learning from the past year. We don't know all the needs academically and socially and emotionally of our kids going forward. We're only going to be able to help our legislators make the right decisions if they hear what our experiences were. So we've created this survey for you to share your stories of learning during COVID-19. And we're going to collate and share the stories with our legislators, hopefully to help them make decisions, because they're going to be making decisions, not just in this legislative session, but in the ones going forward. So these stories will have a lasting impact. So I've got, these are the survey questions that are in the survey. We don't have to go through them. And here's a link to complete the survey. It's also been in a number of your emails for the convention, convention updates and information about the convention. So you can get it from there, or you can use the QR code. And we had one of our board members share her story with our legislators at Hill Visits this year. And we had a whole list of everything that we wanted to tell them. And I will tell you, the thing that they remembered was her story of what it was like to teach her three kids at home during distance learning this year. And everything that we asked for was put in context of that story. So it's really impactful. So we hope that you'll share it with us. And there's us. Any other questions?
Can I ask a question instead of typing at this point?
Yeah, please.
My question is, for things like this, do you find that like the best PTA groups are sharing this on their Facebook pages, you know, with just their members? Like, do you have any experience of like, to the degree that we should be trying to do advocacy with kind of the general school public?
I would say as the more parent voices, the better, because sometimes advocacy is a learned function, right? So that's why we set up voter voice to be as user-friendly as possible, to give you background, but then write a message that you can either use it as is, or you can modify it to your own experience. People more experienced might modify it, but we're never going to be able to train people in advocacy if we don't share it widely and get the information out. And the beauty of PTA is people say advocacy is political, but we are backed by our national organization. We don't take any position that isn't backed. So by being a part of PTA, you're accepting the priorities of PTA in these policy areas that have been researched and really looked into to see what's best for all kids. So you as a local unit have some backing, that it's not just one member taking on a topic and going off with it.
Helpful, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? Oh, great, thanks. Christine, can you write those bill numbers down in case we can't save the chat? Let's see if I can do it. Any other questions from anybody? I'm so glad you all were here. Please email me at any time if you have questions about advocacy or a topic or something that's coming up at your local district or something that you've heard about. You know, we're really trying to communicate more with our local units about the issues and trying to be as helpful as we can. Oh, another question?
I was just wondering if you could share this PowerPoint or some of it somewhere.
Yes. Yep. I think there's a plan to share all the PowerPoints from the workshops. I don't know exactly where they're going to be. I think they're going to be in a shared folder somewhere that we're going to send the link out to. Yeah. So yes.
Yes, there will be. They'll compile all of the presentations and workshops and put them into a folder, and you'll get a link after the convention's over.
Awesome. Thanks, Christine.
I have another question on the action alert and the responses that are provided by the PTA. Can you talk a little bit about like how much we should be expected to change from it in order to have it be well received and not just feel like a canned response?
Yep. That is up to the individual. You know, sometimes it depends on the alert, right? We may specifically ask in an alert for people to add their own personal story depending on the legislation. But when you get to this point in the session, they're kind of taking tallies, right? So, and the way voter voice is set up is you're only able to send it to your legislators that you are a constituent of. So they're specifically taking tallies of my constituents are emailing me on this topic. So while the message is important, they might read the first one that comes in and then they recognize it's on the same topic and they give it the same weight, but they tally it right under the same topic. So it depends on where we're at in the session and how much more crafting of the legislation is. So we'll be specific about that in the voter voice of, you know, what we're trying to accomplish. But that's a great question.
Thank you.
And Stacy, did we get your question? That's all right. I do that all the time. All right, Christine, did we get a message from Amy about our status?
We have not. I believe at 8:55, she's going to send us back to the main room, or we
Okay.
can leave this current room and we'll be put back into the main room.
Okay, great. So, and that's in about 2 minutes. So we have about 2 minutes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I don't think we need any of that anymore. Awesome. So again, really, we don't have a big team to do advocacy. What we see in a lot of the advocacy groups in Minnesota is that they have paid staff to do this work. But I will tell you, we are being sought out as the voice of parents. We got an email from Senator Uyghur, who's the minority leader on education in the Senate. And he specifically wanted to get Minnesota PTA feedback on the education savings accounts. And we'll probably be using some of our written comments in his testimony on the Senate floor when he tries to amend the bill to remove that provision. So, you know, they hear Minnesota PTA, they want to hear our voices. And we had some impact in previous sessions when other versions of these public money to private schools have been brought up. And Senator Susan Kent, who is the majority DFL lead in for the whole Senate, took our written comments and read from them on the Senate floor. Of course, she's a former PTA member. A number of senators and representatives have served on their PTAs in various leadership roles. So they know what it's like to be in your shoes, to be PTA leaders. So they bring that experience to the floor with them as well. So your voices do count, and the more the merrier.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for the wonderful presentation. I think we're just about ready to move into the main room.
Okay.
To conclude.
Have a great rest of the conference.